There are an estimated 8 million children like Bernard living in orphanages around the world. Of these, at least 50%, and in some places as many as 90%, have a living parent. And most have other family members too, siblings, aunts and uncles or grandparents. But against a backdrop of poverty, orphanages can become magnets that attract families to relinquish their children into them. The children may appear better off, but research now shows that without the nurturing support of families, they cannot fully flourish. They are also more likely to suffer from mental health issues and are more vulnerable to being trafficked or abused. And all will live with the long-term damage of being institutionalized forever. In one study, 1 in 3 children leaving care became homeless, 1 in 5 gained a criminal record, and 1 in 10 took their own life.
Good afternoon. I apologize for my accent. I have a complicated history. I feel very much at home here, actually, so I'm very grateful for the World Without Orphans team for organizing this event because I'm related to a lot of you. I was born in England. English people are very quiet. Let me try again. I was born in England, but my father was born in Malaysia. Not far from Singapore. But his father was born in Sri Lanka. Now my mother, that's when things get complicated. I want to show you a picture of my grandfather. You're asking, which one is my grandfather? It's the guy with the hat. My mother's mother was an Indian. The Indians are quiet. But my mother's father was an Irishman. And, oh, the Irish are here. That's good. And it was complicated because my grandfather was an incredibly good shot. And when the villages in India were being terrorized by man-eating tigers, they would call him in to hunt them down and shoot them. So this is a tiger that he shot that had gone rogue and was killing villagers. And when the war began, my grandfather signed up and joined in with the Indian regiment and fought against Rommel in El Alamein, North Africa. And he died providing covering fire for his troops and was buried in Africa. Are there no Africans in the room? It's not good to cheer my grandfather's death, so you were just being kind, I know, thank you. He was awarded a military cross, which is the second highest award you can get in the military in Britain. But things got bad for my mother and her 2 sisters. Because it was a mixed race marriage, her white relatives were embarrassed about these children. And so had all 3 put into 3 separate orphanages. And they grew up longing for home. An orphanage wasn't a home for them. It was just a place where they lived. They wanted home and they wanted family. My mother didn't need to be in an orphanage, did she? She had living relatives. She had a living mother. She had aunties and uncles and grandparents that would have been delighted to care for her. We've been talking a lot, haven't we, about prevention. What would have prevention looked like for my mother to stop her going into an orphanage? Actually, what would be necessary was to teach white people that mixed race people are okay. That would have helped, wouldn't it? There are all sorts of things that need to be done in education to stop some children coming into orphanages. Sometimes it's teaching cultures that girls are as valuable as boys. Sometimes it's teaching cultures that disabled people are valuable in the sight of God and therefore should be valuable to us. Sometimes prevention is about telling a better story to our culture. And we, the church, need to be known for speaking up for people that are left behind by cultures. So prevention is important. We've also been thinking a little bit about intervention. I love the way this rhymes. It's almost like Susan Hillis is a rapper when she came up with these things. Oh, I want to tell you a little bit about the end of the story of my mum. So my mother was collected from India by her grand aunt. She found out about her and her sisters and brought them all to England when they became teenagers. And my mother started to train to be a nurse in Brighton in England. And when she got to the training, people were very shocked that A, she could speak English, because obviously Indians can't speak English. That was the assumption. They were also shocked that she knew how to use a knife and a fork, because obviously Indians live in the jungle, don't they? And they don't know how to use civilized things like knives and forks. People used to tell her that she was a Paki, which is short for a Pakistani. There's nothing wrong with being Pakistani, it's just my mother wasn't. They told her to go black home, which is a kind of clever thing to say if you're racist. They used to throw bananas at her in the street. My mother was a teenager when she was training to be a nurse, but she started to fight a one-woman resistance movement against the racism that was in her culture. And she started it on a Friday night when she'd cook a large vat of curry and rice and invite anyone that didn't fit in to come to our house for food. And so I grew up with the most hospitable of mothers you could imagine. And I feel the same way. We live in a country called England, and England is in the middle of a global crisis. We've decided we don't want to be part of the continent that we're part of. And so we've launched a campaign called Brexit. I hate Brexit. I believe in unity, not walls and barriers. And so I'm fighting a one-family resistance movement because of my mother. I want to say along with Joshua, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. We will welcome anyone that needs hospitality. That's how our family became a fostering family and an adopting family. That's why refugee children have not come to live in an institution down the road where they can be warehoused. They've come to my kitchen table where they're treated like children who are loved by parents. We've been thinking a bit about interventions, haven't we? And one intervention, one problem with our interventions is sometimes as Christians, we're keen to be activists. We just want to get out there and do stuff. Don't confuse me with facts and figures. Don't slow me down. Don't ask me questions. God's told me to do this. You can't stop me. But I want to say as Christians, we're called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our mind. It's not unspiritual to think critically about what we do as Christians who want to serve the Lord. And that means we need to develop strong theological frameworks for what we do, not just good intentions. And biblically, we need to understand what God expects to be in place for a child to flourish. And I've got a longer paper on this, but I've only got a few minutes. I think we need to think about a child in 4 dimensions. The first one you might think about is a child is a spiritual being. They are made in the image of God. And therefore they cannot fully flourish without knowing that God. And so at some stage we want to help children to have access to an opportunity to uncover something about who God is and how he loves them. We would love that. We need to be careful with that. Because vulnerable children in our care are vulnerable, and therefore we need to be careful about exploiting the power that we have over them. And so we need to be sensitive about how we talk about faith. We don't want to brainwash children or proselytize children, but we do want to give them an invitation, and we want to tread carefully with that. Now, sometimes, because we think it's more important that children have a relationship with God than anything else, we don't bother caring for any of their other needs. I've met people that say the only task the church is supposed to be involved in is evangelism. Everything else is a waste of time. I want to say to those people, please tell that to Jesus. Jesus was amazing at preaching the gospel, but he was also amazing at caring for all of our needs, wasn't he? He didn't just preach. He wasn't just a person of good words, he was also a person of good works, wasn't he? Now, sometimes we prioritize as Christians the physical needs of children. We want to clothe children, we want to feed children, we want to give them shelter. And that's what happened to my mother. They wanted to look after her. It was a Christian orphanage that she was in. And so they took her away from her family. The family wasn't a good family to be in, that was right. But an institution was not the right place for her to flourish. The institution provided for her spiritual needs. They told her about Jesus, and they provided for her physical needs. They gave her a bed to sleep in and food to eat and clothes to put on her back. But you know what? They totally neglected her social needs. I don't think it's a really difficult theological assumption to say children flourish in families. What does it say? Psalm 67. Gary quoted it last night. God places the lonely in families. What does family look like? Institutions are not families. I've got a various number of reasons why. It's possible to age out of an institution, isn't it? You can become too old to be cared for in the institution. Do you know what? You never age out of family. I was desperately sad when my mother died when I was 39 years old. I never stopped needing her in my life. I didn't say, right, I've hit 18, I'm ready to face the world, I don't need any parents anymore. Families are for life. Institutions are at best temporary interventions. They also separated my mother from her sisters, from her aunties, her uncles, her grandparents. An institution can never be a substitute for those family relationships. So, we are born to be spiritual, we're born to be sociable, and we're born to be physically and environmentally safe, but we also need to be put back together with ourselves. We're emotional, psychological beings. And all the best research tells us that institutions are not good at helping people to develop a good, healthy sense of who they are. We need all the other bits of the puzzle in order for that to come into play. So I think if we have a strong and clear biblical understanding of what God expects for us in order for us to flourish, we won't be able to keep on carrying on with orphanages. We'll have to transition to family-based care. And when we do that, we'll see children begin to thrive in ways that they'll never do in an orphanage. I want to say this to you, and this is a hard word. Being sincere is not an excuse for being sincerely wrong. I believe there are many sincere people who are running orphanages. They love Jesus. But that's not enough. It's not enough because we're supposed to be responsible in front of God for how we use the gifts and skills that he's given us, including our thinking. We don't have to fear the best research that's out there because all truth is God's truth. How about this? It is not enough to be well-intentioned. We need to be well-informed. We need the best research. Not just anecdotes, not just great videos, not just lovely stories. We need the best research because that's what children deserve. They need the best outcomes and the best care we can imagine. All right, I'm not going to tell you that one or that one. All right, I'm coming to land. My mother was treated appallingly because she was the wrong race at the wrong time in the wrong place. But by the grace of God, she came to know Jesus, and she became the most hospitable, gracious person that you can imagine. She's inspired me and my family. My mother used to come for Christmas dinner and sit with all of our children, our adopted children and our foster children. There's normally 7 kids that live in our household. One of her favorite foster children was a little boy. And this little boy almost didn't come into our care because we got a call on a Friday night. And they phoned up and they said, oh, Krish and Miriam, we know you've already got a house full of people. Is there any chance you can take another child? And I said, okay, tell me something more. But it was too late. My wife had said yes. Inspired by my mother, I think. My wife is now the most hospitable person on the planet. And I said, tell me something about this child. And they said, oh, we can't tell you much. All we can tell you is He is a biter. Oh, man. Biter. That's the worst thing out, isn't it? Who's he going to bite? What's he going to bite? Is he going to leave teeth marks on my furniture, or is he going to leave teeth marks on my children? This is not good. And then the Christian part of my brain kicks in. And I say to myself, you know what? Biter. That is an inadequate description of a human person. By the grace of God, you and I are more than the worst thing we've ever done. And more than the worst thing that's ever been done to us. Well, I welcomed that child in because my mother had shown me another way to live. She'd shown me that the grace and hospitality of God are shown best when we welcome people not into programs, not into institutions, but when we welcome them into our families. When we were lost and far away from God, where did he take us? He said, in my Father's house are many rooms, and I've gone there to prepare a place for you. If God our Father welcomes us into his house, how can we only welcome children into institutions? They need to be coming home. I don't know about you, I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to go home, not because when I get home I get to eat my food or because I get to sit in my chair or watch my television. I once came home for a conference and everyone was out. It was weird. I didn't want to be in a house. I wanted to be with my family. Every child in an orphanage right now needs to be with a family. If it can be with their birth family, amazing. If it can't be with their birth family, let's get them to an alternative family. Friends, I think however bad things are in your country, whatever's going on in our world right now, our households can be little places of hope and resistance. Because as for me and my household, I will serve the Lord. Thanks for listening.